με τον καθηγητή Μανουέλ στο πλαίσιο του συνεδρίου Πιέσκο που πραγματοποιήθηκε στη Θεσσαλονίκη από τον κύριο Κοντουρά το περασμένο καλοκαίρι και αντιληφθήκαμε το ιδιαίτερο ενδιαφέρον του για το γεγονός πώς επιβιώνουν οι γενείς ποικιλίες τύπου κάτω από τις έντονα ξηροφθενικές συνθήκες του νησιού. Αντιληφθήκαμε στην περιοδία που είχαμε χθες και σήμερα ότι το πλάνο του, στο μακροπρόθεσμο πλάνο του Βορρό, και θεωρούμε ότι η σημερινή του παρουσία πιθανότατα είναι το ξεκίνημα διδακτορικό δίπλωμα από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Βορρό το 1991 και για μία πενταετία δούλεψε στον ιδιωτικό τομέα στο φημισμένο εινοποιείο της Απάτου. Από το 1996 εργοδοτήθηκε αρχικά ως αναπληρωτής καθηγητής και κατόπιν από το 2004 ως full professor στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Βορρό. Η ερευνητική του δραστηριότητα εστιάζει στην επίδραση κλιματικών και εδαφικών συνθηκών και πώς αυτά επηρεάζονται μέσα σε αυτό που λέμε και ορίζουμε ως κλιματική αλλαγή. Έχουμε ζητήσει από τον ΚΙΣ να κάνει μια ομιλία περίπου σε 45 λεπτά και ακολούθως έχουμε αρκετό χρόνο για να αναπτύξουμε μια διεξοδική συζήτηση. So, KIS, please join us in the podium.
Thank you, Marcos. Very happy to be here. Unfortunately, I have to address you in English because I don't speak Greek, unfortunately. My topic is about sustainability and how can we continue to cultivate vines in a sustainable way and, if possible, even increase the sustainability of our practices. So, the outline of my talk, first, if we want to have a sustainable operation, the operation needs to be economically sustainable. And then also from an environmental point of view, the operation needs to be sustainable regarding the soils. So there are two issues, soil erosion and vineyard flow management. Then another very important point in viticulture for the coming years is the issue of climate change. So the climate is changing, and how can we adapt our vine growing practices to this changing climate in a sustainable way? To cultivate vines, we need, unfortunately, pesticides. It's almost impossible to cultivate vines without pesticides. So how can we minimize the use of pesticides in viticulture? Is vine growing a sustainable activity? I think it is, because you know this man who lived 2,000 years ago, but very far from here. And we cultivate vines in this area for more than 2,000 years. So that means it is sustainable, because vine growing is taking place in this part of the world since such a long time. To continue to grow vines, so first of all, the activity needs to be sustainable from an economical point of view. And of course, all the vine growers here in the room, they know that, but maybe the scientists, they are not very much aware of it. That if you have a vineyard and you want to be sustainable, then you need to be economically sustainable. And so you need to grow good yields. You need to reach a good selling price. And there are several ways to reach a good selling price. Of course, your quality needs to be very, very good. If you don't make high quality wine, you will not sell it. But also you need a good marketing strategy to reach a certain reputation. And origin can also be a very good way to increase the selling price, because there's definitely people like wines that come from a very specific origin with particular characteristics, because the vines were growing on a specific soil under specific climatic conditions. And then, of course, you need to control your production costs. So all these points, and you need to reach a sort of balance between good yield, control production costs, and having good prices obtaining good prices for your wine. And so once your operation is financially sustainable, then it needs to be also environmentally sustainable. And consumers are more and more aware about this point that wine growing needs to be sustainable. So it also becomes a selling argument to have a sustainable operation. So sustainability regards in the first place the soils where we are growing the vines. We need not to destroy the soils. And the second point is climate change. The climate is changing. And of course, as vine growers, we can minimize our CO2 output, but anyway, the temperatures are increasing. And even if collectively we manage to reduce somehow our CO2 output, still the temperature will be increasing over the next decades, and we have to adapt our viticulture in a sustainable way to this new situation. So we have increased temperatures and increased drought. So we have to adapt our viticulture to higher temperatures and less water. And then also we need to reduce in pesticides. Since the 1970s, agriculture in general has been relying very much on pesticides, and definitely now there's very much awareness that we need to reduce the amount of pesticides that we use in viticulture. So vine growing, maybe more than any other agricultural product, is very much related to the environment. Since a very long time, vines have been marketed by the origin. And so sometimes we have appellations, the name of the village. Like here, this is a place close to where I live, Saint-Emilion, which is a very nice wine growing town. And the name of Saint-Emilion is famous. So wine growers can charge higher prices just because the wine comes from this area. Of course, it's also good in quality. Then a wine can come from a specific estate. And in Bordeaux, this is Chateau Haut-Brion, which was one of the first estates that started to market the wine as an estate wine. And it started as early as 1650. So they are, for 350 years, they are marketing their wine as an estate wine. And we can go even further. Now some people, they market their wine as single vineyards. This is a famous wine from Napa Valley, Martha's Vineyard. So the Heights company, they are selling this particular vineyard because the wine is very, very good and very specific for even a higher price. So the origin, in some situations when you have good soils and good climatic conditions and you find the right variety to grow in a particular place, you can have a very specific wine and charge higher prices. So this can create added value. And in viticulture, we call this effect of the environment on the quality and the style of the wine, we call it the terroir effect. Well, terroir is initially a French word, but now it's used all over the world. And terroir is very much about resources, and the vine is picking up resources from the environment, of course from the climate, and so from the climatic environment, the temperature is a resource which can be high, it can be low, water is definitely a resource, CO2 is a resource, and from the soil, the vine picks up water and minerals, and these are also resources. Now, and every climate has a specific set of resources. In every particular situation, the light, the CO2, the water, the minerals are present in different amounts. And wine growers try to optimize the output in terms of wine quality and wine typicality by adapting their plant material and their training system and the viticultural techniques to these specific resources. So in a specific place, the vine growers try to figure out which variety does best in their specific locations, and they adapt their management strategies to the environmental conditions. And that explains that if you go look at wine growing in Champagne or in Bordeaux or in Napa Valley or in Cyprus, it's all different, and it should be different. There's no general recipe that you can apply everywhere because the environmental conditions are different. So if you want to produce the best possible wine in a specific place, you need to adapt to these local set of climatic conditions. And this gives a specific potential of your grapes, which you can analyze. You can analyze the sugar content, the acidity, the pH of your grapes, and also the aroma compounds and tannins, and that gives a specific wine. So obviously the quality and the style of the wine is linked to the place where the wine is grown. And there's nothing mystical about this. This is just basic agronomics. That the plant grows a different way, if there's more or less nitrogen available, there's more or less water available, higher temperatures, lower temperatures, the plant grows a different way, the metabolism is different, and this gives different composition of the grapes. Now let's look at the points where sustainability can be endangered. So one point where sustainability is an important issue is in soils. And soils can literally be destroyed. We can lose the capital. The soil is a sort of capital which we can lose if we manage it poorly. And so soils can be eroded, and this can be a natural process. On slopes, it can be a natural process that soils are eroded, and if it happens in a very small proportion, it's not necessarily a problem. But man can increase soil erosion by poor management, and then you can have this sort of situations where the roots are on the surface. Here, since the vines were planted, the soil was 10 or 20 centimeters. So it means in 20 years, if the soil loses 20 centimeters, it cannot go on forever. And in 30 or 50, 40 years, the soils are literally destroyed. And of course, this is mainly a problem in hillside locations, because erosion is important when there are rainstorms and the soils are pouring down from the slopes with the water. But humans can increase erosion, and in fact, moving soils with a bulldozer is a form of erosion provoked by man. So to be very careful about this. And I will just show you some results from, before. Some ways to limit erosion is strip cropping. So you can plant the rows not in the sense of the steepest slope, but parallel to the slope. Often growers say, we cannot do it because the tractor cannot drive, but some people do. And this is from Barolo, and in Piedmont in general. The Italians are very, very good in strip cropping. You see how steep this slope is, and all the rows are in this direction. And that definitely limits erosion. Another way to limit erosion is to grow grass between the rows. Cover crop is a very good way to limit soil erosion. I will show you some experiments, some results from an experiment in the Saint-Emilion area, close to where I live, where we showed that if you move soil before plantation, it can have a big impact on how the vines will behave after plantation. And we compared two ways of soil preparation. In one part of the vineyard, the soils were deeply plowed and they made terraces. In another part of the vineyard, on the slopes, they just planted the rows downhill the slope. The estate is called Chateau Faubourg, and it's an estate of Saint-Emilion. So this is a part of the estate where we did the experiment. In this part of the vineyard, this is the highest part of the slope, and this is the lower part of the slope. In this part of the vineyard, the rows are just down the slope. And in this part of the vineyard, they did very intense soil preparation, and they did deep plowing, and they made terraces. In this part of the vineyard, the terraces here this way, and here this way. And on this map, you see an indicator of the nitrogen status of the vines. And you can see that in the part of the vineyard where soil preparation was minimal, there is very little, the vine nitrogen status is quite even. And in part of the vineyard where they moved the soil very much, some parts of the vineyard are very, very low in nitrogen, so low in nitrogen that the vines struggle to survive. And in other parts of the vineyard, there was accumulation of topsoil, and the vines are very, very vigorous, and this is because they are high in nitrogen. So we measured the yeast available nitrogen in the grapes, which is a good indicator of vine nitrogen status. And you see that in the downhill plantations, these were 4 locations in the block. It's quite even compared to and the phenolic compounds in the grapes was also quite even. Now, if you compare it to the place where they made the terraces and where they moved a lot of soil, yeast available nitrogen varied from 50, which is very, very low, even 40 here, up to 160. And this resulted in more variable phenolic compounds in the grapes. And there where nitrogen was low, there were higher amounts of phenolic compounds, and where nitrogen was high, phenolic compounds were lower. For other grade parameters, so the bunch weight was quite even on the part of the field where it did downhill plantations, and berry weight was also very, very similar. And then on the terraces, the bunch weight was very, very highly variable, from 90 grams to 240 grams per bunch, and berry weight was also very, very variable. Of course, bunch weight and berry weight were high in the places of the vineyard where nitrogen was high, and bunch weight and berry weight were low in the parts of the vineyard where nitrogen were low. So a message is to be very careful with soil preparation, because if you move a lot of soil, then you can create a very, very heterogeneous vineyard. And in particular with regard to nitrogen availability. And this can induce high variations in yield and in quality parameters. Regarding the soil, vineyard floor management is also an important issue and has also environmental impact. So you can get rid of your weeds just by weeding. In some estates with the tractor, if it's possible to mechanize the vineyards, you can just return the soil and destroy the weeds by plowing. Another way is using cover crop, and this is very much used in France. Use cover crop between the rows and just a small strip of herbicides underneath the vines. Another way is just using herbicides all over. And of course, the environmental impact of this practice is not very good to use the big amounts of herbicides. In many situations, in particular when your vineyard is adapted to mechanization, it's perfectly possible to do without any use of herbicides, either through tillage or through cover crop, and now even tools have been developed to plow the soil underneath the row, even if you have cover crop between the rows. Of course, this increases production cost. In a mechanized vineyard, if you compare the use of herbicides, full use of herbicides, and one of these techniques, then generally the difference is about between 800 and 1,000 euros per hectare in production cost. So that means if you have a yield of 7 or 8 tons, that means something like 15 or 20 cents extra cost per bottle of wine produced. Of course, and even in vineyards with bush vines, if they are widely planted, it's quite easy to use mechanical weeding. It's the vineyard in Spain, and in Spain they use very often these bush vines, and they can go in two directions through the vineyard and very easily get rid of the weeds. Of course, if you are planting your vineyards in small terraces, which are where you can not put a tractor in, no possibility of mechanization, it's much more difficult to do without herbicides. This is in Switzerland, in Lavaux, but here in Cyprus also you have often very, very small terraces. In those small terraces, it's very, very difficult to cultivate vines without the use of herbicides. Okay, this was the soil part of my talk. Now we are going to move to the climate, and in particular the impact of climate change. And how can we adapt to climate change in a sustainable way? So climate change is increasing temperatures worldwide, and this is already happening, and in particular since the mid-1980s, and there is a substantial increase in temperature in most wine-growing regions. We've gained between 1 and 2 degrees centigrade since the mid-1980s, which is substantial. And of course, because climate is such an important driver of wine quality and style, that this will impact grapevine yields and grape composition and wine quality and style. Another point is that in many wine-growing regions, not all wine-growing regions, but in many wine-growing regions, particularly in the Mediterranean basin, there is less rainfall, and higher temperatures also means higher evapotranspiration. And so that means that the combination of lower rainfall and higher evapotranspiration means increased drought. So we need to adapt our vineyards to higher temperatures and to lower resources in water. So these are two different aspects, so let's treat it separately. Let's look how we can adapt to higher temperatures, and then we're going to look how we can adapt to increased drought in our vineyards. Let's go back to the concept of terroir, so the influence of climate and soil on wine quality and style. If you want to produce in a specific location optimum quality, the first requirement, of course, is that you have to produce grapes that reach full ripeness. Every wine grower knows that if your grapes are not fully ripened, your wine will be acidic with low alcohol and green aromas, and the wine will not be good. But on the other hand, the grapes should not ripen in the hottest part of the season. If your grapes ripen in the hottest part of the season, say in end of July or in August, then the grape composition is often unbalanced. You get very high sugar levels, very low acidity, and much less complexity in aroma compounds. And if you look in most wine growing regions over Europe, then people have always locally adapted their grapevine varieties to the local climatic conditions, that they ripen at the end of the season. If you go from Mosel to Alsace to Champagne to Burgundy to Loire Valley to Bordeaux to La Rioja to Tuscany to Nemea, in every region people have found the grapevine variety that ripens at the end of the season. And there's a sort of ideal ripening window. To get balanced grapes, it's ideal to ripen roughly between the 10th of September and the 15th of October, because that's the part of the season when the days are a little bit shorter, there are no excessive temperatures, the nights are cooler, and you get much more balanced fruit. So the risk with climate change is that grape ripening is earlier and earlier, and then the ripeness of our grapes will shift out of the ideal ripening window. And so an important adaptation to a warmer climate is to delay the ripeness. There's less and less risk to harvest unripened grapes, but there's more and more risk to ripen unbalanced grapes with high pH, high sugar, low acidity, and much less interesting aromas, which gives wines with less freshness and less aromatic complexity. So we need to find a way to delay the ripeness. And a very powerful way to adapt the timing of the ripeness is variety. And this is a tool that growers have always been using since hundreds of years. That people grow Tempranillo in La Rioja, and they grow Sangiovese in Tuscany, and then they grow Atrogitico in Nemea. It's just because those varieties in those locations ripen in the right window. But with climate change, the risk is that the local varieties move out of the right ripening window. And in Bordeaux, we are very much aware of this. In Bordeaux, the main varieties we grow are Sauvignon Blanc and Sémillon for white wine production, and Merlot and Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon for red wine production. Now, our average harvest date for Sauvignon Blanc is somewhere between 5 and 10 September, which is almost too early. And so Sauvignon Blanc is already moving out of the ideal ripening window, and we struggle to make high quality Sauvignon Blanc, because now Sauvignon Blanc is more and more ripening in a very warm part of the season. And the same is happening with Merlot. Merlot is still adapted to the Bordeaux climate, but we used to ripen Merlot between 20 and 25 September, now it's between 10 and 15 September. And we are afraid that in 20 years' time, Merlot will move out the right ripening window. And then Merlot will no longer be adapted to the climate of Bordeaux. And so we need to take action. And so 10 years ago, with support of the local Wine Growers Association, we planned an experiment where we compare 50 different varieties, and this is to prepare Bordeaux for the future. Because we want to look for varieties when, as I said, Merlot is still adapted, but we are afraid that in 20 years' time, Merlot will no longer be adapted, and we need to move to other varieties. So we're experimenting how varieties from other regions in the world behave in a climate in Bordeaux that's getting warmer and warmer. And we call this project the VitaDAP project. And so we have many, many varieties. You can see we have Atrogitico, Assyrtiko, of course the Bordeaux varieties, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. What else do we have? Grenache, of course, the later ripening varieties. Mavrout from Bulgaria. Morastel, which is from Spain, Mourvèdre, which is also a very late ripening variety, Sangiovese, Saperavi, Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional, Vignau, Dina Rouvreau. And so in this list there are many late ripening varieties. And one of the outcomes of this result is that we, over the past years, get very, very good results with Albarino for white and Touriga Nacional, which is a Portuguese variety from the Douro Valley for red. And now these varieties are allowed in the Bordeaux region and for 5% for the time being. So in the appellation rules, they included now Touriga Nacional for red and Albarino for white, but on an experimental basis. So growers are allowed to plant 5% of their vineyard with Touriga Nacional and Albarino to adapt their vineyard for climate change. So that's a big change, because people always thought that these appellation rules were completely fixed, but when the climate is changing, you need to change also your practices. You need to change your plant material. So some results from this experiment. So we're monitoring very, very precisely phenology, and these are veraison dates, and there is as much as 25 days between the most early ripening variety. Well, I exclude Chasselas, which is a very weird variety from Switzerland. But Pinot Noir, if you compare Pinot Noir to Petit Verdot, Carignan, and Sauvignon Blanc, there's 25 days. So that means there's room for adaptation. There's so much diversity. There's a lot of genetic diversity in the precocity of grapevine varieties. This is a very big resource for adaptation to climate change, and we must use it. And so for a region like Bordeaux, in the first place, we can change our variety mix and keeping our Bordeaux varieties, because Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon are later ripening than Merlot. So over the coming 20 years, we can decrease Merlot and increase Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. And then maybe after 2050, we need to shift to even later ripening varieties than Cabernet Sauvignon. And so already on an experimental basis, Touriga Nacional and Albarino are authorized. And I look with a lot of interest to your citrus varieties, because your citrus varieties are very, very late ripening. And so that's a potential resource. And when I planted this vineyard experiment, I made a big mistake. I didn't include your citrus varieties. And in particular, varieties like Marateftico and Giannulli and Zinisteri look very, very promising in the context of climate change. I think their very late ripening is a very good resource for adaptation to climate change in many regions in the world. So it's a very, very valuable resource which you have here in Cyprus. Of course, there are other ways in delaying ripeness. Another possible way to delay ripeness is to work on your canopy management. 20 years ago, I learned to my students that you need to have a big leaf area for a relatively small crop, because our challenge was to get our grapes to full ripeness. Now, 20 years later, the situation has completely changed. There's no more risk of not getting the grapes ripen, but now there's risk of having over-ripened grapes. So now I'm telling the students to have a limited leaf area, particularly for a variety like Sauvignon Blanc, to have a reduced leaf area to fruit weight ratio. And if you reduce your leaf area to fruit weight ratio, then you can very much delay. So this is an experiment carried out in New Zealand by Amber Parker. So this is 8 grapes, which is roughly the veraison date. And you see that with low leaf area to fruit weight ratio, you delay your veraison date and you accumulate your sugars much more slowly. So if you're growing a white variety, you don't want to have excessive sugar in your grapes, excessive alcohol, you can very much control it by reducing your leaf area to fruit weight ratio. So either reduce your leaf area or just grow more crop. And the nice thing is that it does not change so much the acidity. And recently we also checked the effect on the aromas, and a reduced leaf area to fruit weight ratio was not impacting the volatile thiols. It was done on Sauvignon Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc very much relies on volatile thiols for the aroma expression. There was no big change in volatile thiols. So if we reduce the leaf area to fruit weight ratio, we have less sugar, similar acidity, and a similar aroma profile, and later ripening. So it's good for climate change. But we also experimented on the red varieties, and the problem with red varieties is that you decrease your anthocyanins. So that's a little bit tricky. So this is more easily applicable on white varieties than it is on red varieties. Because if your leaf area to fruit weight ratio is too low, then you get less tannins and less anthocyanins, which is not good for quality of the red wine. So this is typically an adaptation for white varieties. Of course, vineyards can also move either to higher altitude or to higher latitude. And what I discovered in Cyprus, that you are in a hot country and you have always been growing vines at 1,000 meters in altitude and even up to 1,400 meters in altitude. And this totally makes sense. And recently in China, there was a project from the White Hennessy company. They wanted to make a grapevine in China. And then they discovered, they made a big climate study all over China, and they discovered that China has a very lousy climate to grow vines, because either it's freezing in the winter and the vines freeze to death. Around Beijing, the climate is very warm and humid in the summer, so you get a lot of down mildew problems. And they mapped all the climate all over China, and they discovered that in the Himalayas, in the southwest of China, there's an area at low latitude that you can plant vineyards at very high altitude, that you get a sort of compensation between the low latitude and high altitude. And they have found the perfect climate to grow Bordeaux varieties in China at 2,400 meters in altitude. But it's at the 20th parallel latitude. And the project is called Aoyun, and they sell it, the wine has been released and they sell it for crazy prices. You can also move to higher latitudes. Wine growing is booming in England, and this is just an effect of climate change. 30 years ago, it was not possible to ripen any grapes in England, and now they ripen grapes in England, and there are now thousands of hectares of vines in England, and they make very, very good sparkling wines, which they sell for 25 or 30 euros a bottle, and they're also starting to make good still wines. So the map of wine growing regions worldwide is changing as a result of climate change. So there are losers and winners, and the winners are in high altitude and high latitudes, and the losers maybe at lower latitudes in the warmer climates. So this was the effect of temperature. Now another very important point with climate change is the water resources. And so the availability of water is changing with climate change. So the vines are subject to increased water deficit. And what can we do about that? Well, this part is maybe not very relevant for you in Cyprus, because you are one of the very rare regions in the world where vines are still grown without rootstocks. But in most parts of the world, the vines are grafted. And there are huge differences in resistance to water stress when it comes to comparing rootstocks. Some rootstocks are very sensitive to water stress, like Vipera Montpellier, and other rootstocks are very, very resistant to water stress. And a very resistant rootstock to water stress is 110R. Now, for a region like Bordeaux, we grow a lot of Riparia, and so we can move to 110R to have more drought resistance. And it's very cost effective, because a vine is not more expensive if you compare one rootstock to another. This is a very nice picture taken by a colleague of mine from Geisenheim, Hans Schulz, who took this picture in Australia. And some part of the vineyard was grafted on SO4, which is quite sensitive to drought, and another part of the vineyard is planted on 110R. And see how different the vines behave. So planting on the right rootstock is very, very important if you use rootstock. And in Bordeaux, we started a new breeding program, which is led by a colleague of mine, Elisa Marguerite, and we're trying to find rootstocks which are even more drought resistant than 110R. It's a very good way of adapting the vines to a drier climate. There's also a lot of differences in how the vines behave when you compare grapevine varieties. Some varieties are very sensible to drought, and others are very resistant. Spain is very close to where we live, and we go very often to Spain. And there's a very dry region in Spain which is called Aragon, just south of Saragossa, and they grow a lot of Grenache. And traditionally they grow their Grenache grafted on 110R. Average rainfall, annual rainfall is 350 millimeters a year, and they dry farm their grapes. They have not very high yields, but they manage to harvest 5 or 6 tons per hectare, which is not too bad, and Grenache does perfectly well. And one day these people thought, well, maybe Merlot is a popular variety, let's try Merlot. And this is what happened when they tried Merlot. Because Merlot is just not adapted to hot and dry climates. So it was a disaster. And in fact, the people in that area, they had chosen Grenache since hundreds of years. It was the right choice, because Grenache was adapted to their conditions. And planting Merlot in their conditions is just a nonsense. There's been increasing interest over the past years of how local varieties, which are not as well known as international varieties, how they can be a tool to adapt to a dry climate. And in particular, there's one research group which has been particularly active on this field, is the group from Hipólito Medrano in Mallorca. And they've done a lot of research of how their local varieties can better resist to a dry climate compared to most of the international varieties. And also in Portugal, in Portugal there's a very rich history of agronomic. There are hundreds of local varieties in Portugal, and some of these varieties are very adapted to dry climates. And what I discovered here in Cyprus is that many of the varieties are very drought resistant, which totally makes sense because the generations of wine growers who were there before you were growing vines, they've selected the grapevine varieties on this criteria because they were facing a warm and dry climate. So they needed grapevine varieties which were adapted to the Cyprus conditions. And so they selected very dry varieties. And this is a very interesting resource. And currently I have a PhD student who is, you remember the VitaDAP experiment in Bordeaux where we compare 50 varieties, and I have a PhD student who is working on the drought resistance of these varieties. We want to figure out, for instance, why Grenache is so much better resistant to drought than a variety like Merlot. And we want to make a sort of classification that the growers can use if they want to plant a vineyard. Say, well, our area is very dry, and which varieties we need to avoid in our dry climatic conditions. And as I told you, I made a big mistake because in this VitaDAP experiment there are no Cyprus varieties because I was ignorant, I didn't know that. And but I'm going to repair my error. And this year I'm going to introduce Sinisteri and Marateftico in the trial by crafting 2 other varieties over with this plant material. And fortunately we had this plant material in France, in Vassar, with a great grapevine collection in Vassar. So I had the wood coming in, and in next May we will graft over Sinisteri and Marateftico in this field trial, so my PhD student can include this variety in his PhD. So plant material is a very interesting option to adapt to dry climate, and it totally makes sense in a dry climate. You should, if you use rootstock, you should use a drought-resistant rootstock and a drought-resistant variety, and don't plant Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc in a dry climate. Another way to adapt to a dry climate is training system, and there's a long tradition in the Mediterranean region to grow vines as Gobelin trained bush vines. This training system is very well adapted to dry climates and to warm climates. You see them all around the Mediterranean basin, in Spain, in southern Italy, in North Africa, in Lebanon, in Cyprus, in Greece. Generally they have quite low yields, not always, and the trick is that they have a quite low leaf area per hectare basis, and they are very adapted to drought. But strangely enough, all the scientists who worked on training systems, they all totally ignored Gobelin. If you go to the scientific literature, there's not one serious publication on Gobelin. There's more than 1 million hectares. This is the most drought-resistant training system. And people like Alain Carbonneau, Stefano Poli, Andy Reynolds, they studied the most weird training system of some of those training systems. They studied, there's maybe only 20 hectares in the world, and they put a lot of effort in studying them, and they ignored bush vines. I don't know why. But it's time to study bush vines and have a better understanding why these vines are so incredibly drought and heat resistant. And with these bush vines, well, you know that you can grow very high quality with less than 400 millimeters of rain a year and without irrigation. Now, if you need to trellis your vineyards because you want to mechanize, then wider spacing can also be an option to reduce your leaf area per hectare. If you have wider spacing, you have less leaf area per hectare, and so you have less transpiration, and you save water. Now, unfortunately, around the Mediterranean basin, I see so many of those bush vines being pulled out, and very often, even with financial aid of the European Union. Isn't that strange? That people have, during hundreds of years, they've invented a very sophisticated training system that resists to high temperatures and drought, And now we're facing increased temperatures and more drought, and the European Union is subsidizing people to pull these vines out. It's totally crazy. But fortunately, in Cyprus, I discovered that those bush vines are still the majority. And when I go to Spain or to Greece or to southern Italy, everybody say, oh, those bush vines are nice. And then I see the young plantations, and they all plant cordon vines and cordon. So they like the old bush vines, but they don't plant them. But I was very happy to see in Cyprus that even in a young plantation, still this tradition survives, and that you still plant gobelet trained bush vines. Now, if you want to mechanize, and if you have a possibility to mechanize, so wider spacing can also be an option. There are many vineyards around the world which are planted 2-meter row spacing, which is very convenient for mechanization. And we have a lot of 2-meter spaced vines in Bordeaux. And many regions around the world are mimicking vine growing in Bordeaux, but the 2-meter spaced vines are not necessarily adapted in very dry climates, because sometimes you need wider spacing just to save water. And it's a very easy calculation. If you plant your rows 3 meters apart and less of 2 meters apart, then every vine has 50% more water resource of the soil. And of course you have less yield. And generally we make a calculation, if you have wider spacing, then the yield per vine is a little bit higher, but still you have lower yields. So you have lower yields. But you also have less production cost. So the price per kilo of grapes is not necessarily much higher. It's just a sort of way of extensive viticulture. You put less vines per hectare, you have less yield, but also less production cost, and the price per kilo of grapes is more or less the same. But of course, this reasoning only applies when your land is not very expensive. When your land is very expensive, then you cannot afford to have wider spacing and lower yields. But like in France, in the Languedoc area, we have a very big area where it's very dry, and the land is very, very cheap, because either you grow vines or you grow nothing. So it makes sense to have wider spacing, and maybe you have the same production on 3 hectares instead of 2 hectares. Then every vine is a little bit more water. It's also important to look at the soil water holding capacity when you are growing vines in a dry climate. In the Bordeaux climate, we have a very wet climate. We have 850 millimeters of rain. And in many years, we don't have enough water deficit to grow high quality grapes. You know that in particular for red wine making, you need water deficit. And in our conditions, we can have not enough water deficit. So in our situation, soils with low water holding capacity are the best soils to grow vines. But this is not necessarily true in dry climates. So for instance, in the Languedoc area in the south of France, soils of hard limestone bedrock, the vines are really, really suffering, and they cannot be considered as the best soils for vineyards. Sometimes soils which are a little bit deeper, with better water holding capacity in those dry climates, are better for growing vines. And so it can be important before choosing a block to plant vines, to have a soil pit and to make a sort of assessment of your soil water holding capacity to see if it's adapted to your climatic situation. Another option, of course, is irrigation. If the climate is very dry, you can move to irrigation. And many regions worldwide have proven that you can grow sustainable yields under irrigation. But when it comes to sustainability, irrigation is not necessarily a good option. Many regions worldwide that have been irrigated since decades, they are now facing that they are running out of water. This is happening in California, this is happening in Australia, that people are facing declining water resources. And this will be more and more the case. Another issue with irrigation is that if you use irrigation and if your winters are dry, then ultimately your soils will increase its salinity. And after, this is not going to happen overnight, but after 30, 40, or 50 years of irrigation, there can be so much salinity in the soil that you have to abandon your vineyards. And some vineyards in Argentina, in Australia, in California, which have been irrigated since the 1960s or 1970s, they are now abandoned for vine growing. So if you put that, you can say for 50 years at one time, but if you put that in the scope of 2,000 or 3,000 years of vine cultivation in the Mediterranean basin, 50 years, I think we have not the right to destroy our soils in 50 years and leave for the next generation soils which are destroyed because they have too much solved. Another issue is that in some blocks they can never be irrigated because there's just no water available. It's too expensive to build the infrastructure for irrigation. Also in some countries, and particularly in Spain, people are irrigating from non-renewable aquifers, and I think this is a crime. It should be forbidden. So this is a picture of irrigation worldwide in some major wine-producing countries, and you see that in New World countries, often irrigation is the rule, and like in Australia, in California, almost all vineyards are irrigated. They just don't think that if they plant a vineyard, they set up the irrigation system. It's just out of their way of thinking that you can even potentially grow vines without irrigation. You see that in some New World areas, they have 1,000 millimeters of rain and they put irrigation because just in their way of thinking, that's what they learned in college, that if you plant a vineyard, you need irrigation. You know that of course in the Mediterranean basin it's completely different, and 20 or 30 years ago there were basically no irrigation. People were growing in this area, all the vineyards were dry farmed. But irrigation is very quickly increasing. Now in Spain it's more than 30%, also in Italy it's progressing. In France it's still very, very small. There's only a few percent of vines which are irrigated. And the only region in France where there's substantial irrigation is Languedoc with 15%. But there's definitely a trend towards more irrigation in viticulture. But the point is we have to be very clear about the water resources that are potentially available for irrigation. And I don't believe that in the Mediterranean basin we have the resources to irrigate all the vines. Now if you look at this picture, which gives the percentage of surface water which is currently used and mainly of course for agriculture, you can see that in many Mediterranean countries, between 50 and 100% of the water is already used for agricultural use. So that means there's no room to irrigate more vineyards. And if you look at the rainfall patterns, and here Cyprus is quite dry, that this is the prediction for 2050, that in most Mediterranean countries the water resources will be even declining. So today there's not much room for irrigating more vineyards, and in 2050 there will even be less room for irrigation. So now moving today to irrigation is not a sustainable option, because then we have to move back, and history learns that it's very, very difficult. Once you start irrigating, it's very, very difficult to move back from irrigation. And so, if you start irrigating, very quickly you use 100 or 150 liters of water to produce 1 bottle of wine. Is that reasonable? I think there are better uses for water for human consumption, or to grow food crops rather than to produce wine. Because we can grow wines without irrigation. You prove it in Cyprus, where 90% of vineyards are not irrigated. And particularly in the Mediterranean basin, there's a tradition that people adapted their plant material and their training systems to the dry climate. And that makes much more sense, and it's much more sustainable than moving to irrigation. And sometimes people use the quality argument to say, well, we need irrigation for quality. But that's not, if you look at some countries where 98% of vineyards are irrigated, surprisingly, very often the very best wines are made without irrigation. Hill of Grace in Australia has been made without irrigation. And most of the vineyards that go into Penfolds Grange are bush vines and made without irrigation. In California, the ridge is not irrigated, Dominus is not irrigated. In the Douro Valley, they're almost not irrigated. Chateau de Pipac, which is very, very dry, they're not irrigated. So it's totally possible to grow high quality wines without irrigation. Now, so I was very happy to see that most vineyards in Cyprus are dry farmed, and this is a very sustainable way to grow vines. Of course, the problem with dry farming, the main problem is that you have lower yields. So I totally understand that wine growing estates also need to be economically sustainable. And so maybe you can use the dry farming as a sort of argument, a commercial argument, to say we are producing wines with a low water footprint and try to charge higher prices. And I saw this on this is tea, and they say our way of irrigation is rainfall. And this is a wine from Chile, where almost all the vineyards are irrigated, but this estate is not irrigating, and they put a mention on the label to sustainably dry farm. So maybe, because most of your vines are not irrigated, you can create the back label from Cyprus, sustainably dry farmed vineyards. The last part of sustainability is the use of pesticides. So you know that it's very difficult, almost impossible to grow vines without pesticides, so we need to reduce the pesticides. And why do we use pesticides in vineyards? Mainly because most of our cultivars were selected for producing high quality grapes and were not selected for disease resistance. With climate change, there will not be necessarily more disease pressure, but there's a general trend for consumers who want the growers to reduce the pesticide use for environmental reasons, but also because they're afraid for their health. They prefer wine with low pesticide use. It's not easy to reduce the amount of pesticides, but it may be one option where researchers are working on is to create resistant varieties. During the 20th century, reduction in pesticides was not really a priority. I worked in the wine growing estate in the 1990s, and we were just using pesticides and nobody cared about. And the awareness maybe something like 20 years that we started really to be aware that we need to decrease the pesticides. And we used to have in France having a treatment frequency index, so the number of treatments around 20 was quite current, between 15 and 20. And with a better use of pesticides, we could reduce by something like 30%. But now we see that in our wet climate, and particularly in Bordeaux, it's very difficult to go under a frequency treatment index of 10 to 15, which is still quite high, just because otherwise there are no more leaves and no more grapes on the vines when you come to harvest. So one possible option is to create disease-resistant plant material. You know that vinifera, most varieties of these vinifera are very susceptible to diseases, but other viti species are much less. And a century ago, people created hybrids, which were 50% vinifera and 50% non-vinifera, and they were very resistant. But the problem was that the quality was not good. Now there are new breeding programs that allow to combine high quality with disease resistance. This is a very nice program from the French INRA Research Institute, where they cross vinifera with a non-vinifera, so they create a resistant variety. And from all the seedlings, they checked the genes which were resistant to downy mildew and powdery mildew. And they only kept the seedlings where there were at least 2 resistant genes for downy mildew and 2 resistant genes for powdery mildew. And then they did a back cross with vinifera. And so the second generation had only 25% of non-vinifera. They checked all the seedlings for 2 genes resistant to downy mildew and 2 genes resistant to powdery mildew. They only kept those. They did another back cross. The next generation had 12% of non-vinifera, then 6%, and 3%, and 1.5%. So after the 6th generation, they have created varieties which had almost 99% of genes of vinifera, but still had resistant genes. Now currently these varieties are tested for their quality performances. 4 are currently being sold, but of course now we need to work on these varieties if they have really the potential to produce high quality wines, and if they are, what are their agronomic performances, what sort of yield. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but this can be an interesting option to very much reduce pesticides. If you grow these resistant varieties, maybe instead of frequency treatment between 10 and 15, maybe you can do with only 2 sprayings, for instance. So it's time to come to the conclusion. Well, I've been traveling with Linda over the past days in Cyprus, and we visited many wineries, and I think in a changing climate, Cyprus, difficult in time, Cyprus has many assets. Most vineyards, I think 90% of vineyards, are sustainably dry farmed, and stick as much as you can to dry farming if you want to grow vines for another 1,000 years or 2,000 years in Cyprus. Most vineyards are planted as bush vines, and bush vines are highly resistant to drought and high temperatures. So keep to this tradition. You don't use rootstocks. I think that can be an interesting asset, and maybe that also increases the resistance to water stress. I think there's not been a lot of studies done to compare vinifera roots with rootstock roots, but your vines are very resistant to drought. And maybe the fact that they are on vinifera roots, maybe it adds to their drought resistance. So, and you have many local varieties which are very late ripening, so adapted to high temperatures, and which are very resistant to drought. This is a major asset in a changing climate, not only for you, but maybe for other countries in the world. So, you thought tonight you came to learn something from me, but I think I came to Cyprus to learn a lot from you. And I think that the world can learn a lot from viticulture in Cyprus, in particular in a changing climate. So to finish, I just want to talk to you about a project which is keeping me busy very much over the past years, and Stefanos is very much involved in this project. There are many wine growers in the room, and as a wine grower, you produce bottles of wine and you sell your bottles of wine. We as scientists, we produce knowledge, and we need this knowledge to go to the consumer. The consumers of our knowledge are other scientists or viticulturists like you. So for us, the publication of research results is a major problem. And there's a problem in the world of scientific publication, is that scientific publication has been very much captured by a few major editors, and they block the diffusion of knowledge. Because as a wine grower, for instance, if you want to access a paper from the Australian Journal of Viticultureology or the American Journal, you cannot access. And the subscriptions are incredibly high, so it's very difficult to access the journals. Now, an increasing number of journals are asking publication fees to the scientists. So we as scientists, sometimes we need to pay 2,000 or 3,000 euros to have a paper published. So this is totally crazy. And we wanted to get out of this trap. So we created 4 years ago a new viticulture journal, which is based on a totally different concept as the existing journals. This journal is not a journal from one university, but it's a journal of a community of universities. And now there are 15 or 16 universities affiliated, and there will be more and more. And we hope in the future to have all the major universities in vine and wine sciences with us in this project. We are also supported by private companies. And so we publish our papers in full open access. You can just Google our website, and all the papers, there are now more than 1,200 papers, which are freely accessible with keywords. You can find all these papers and print them out as PDF copies. We are totally independent of major editors, and so this is a way that the researchers took control over their own publications. Like you as wine growers want to keep control of your distribution, we also want to have control of the distribution of our product, which is the knowledge. Of course, we needed the business model, and our business model is that all these universities, they financially participate. So they are more or less co-owners of the journal, but they financially participate. Also, we have financial support from the private companies, and so this makes it possible to publish everything online. These are our partners, so mainly universities from Europe, but also planted fruit from New Zealand, Adelaide University, Thessaloniki University, University of Athens, Utah from Portugal, University from Spain, and also my institute. I work at Bordeaux Sciences Agro. And we also have support from major wine producing companies, and we're very proud that some of the finest wine producing companies from France, such as but also from Napa Valley, Opus One, Cane, Hennessy, which is producing cognac, and from Argentina, Catena Institute of Wine. So this is what our website looks like. So you can go to our website and then have the papers and download the papers. Last year we created a second journal. So the first journal, Euro One, is a classic scientific journal publishing papers in English. but we also want to transfer our knowledge to wine growers. So we create a second journal, which is based on the same model, so everything is for free on the internet, which we call Ives Technical Reviews. And so we publish very digestible articles, 2-page articles for viticulturists, winemakers, and stakeholders. Because you want to read papers in your own language. We publish now in 6 languages, but we can, of course, add other languages. And so the principle is that for every language, there's one company in each country that supports translation costs. So if you want to have an edition in Greek, we are looking for a company that can pay for the translation in Greek. So all the articles are peer-reviewed. That means they are reviewed by one person from the industry. We have an editorial board with people from the industry and researchers. So every article is reviewed by a person from the industry, mainly to tell if the article is of interest for the industry, and one scientist to say if the content is scientifically sound. The editor-in-chief is David Martin from Plant and Food in New Zealand. So this is what it looks like. The website. Because we started in October, there are only something like 15 papers which are available, but we plan to publish every year something like 25 papers. And we will launch a 3rd journal this year with conference proceedings. There are many very interesting conferences like the JESCO that Stefanos organized last year, and then only the people, many of you attended the JESCO, and then the proceedings, only the people who have been to the conference have access to the proceedings. This is stupid because for the organizing congress, for the researchers, and for everyone in the world, it's interesting to access these papers. So we want to create another journal where we publish freely online conference proceedings from major congresses worldwide. So just go to our website and
question goes to the local varieties we have, whether we can use them as rootstocks. Let's say craft of them other varieties, for example, whether these going to help us and we're going to get the benefits of the varieties as drought resistance and so on.
It's a very interesting approach. Of course, I'm not familiar with it because we only use non-vinifera stock, but vinifera seems to be very drought resistant, and we don't yet know why a variety like Mysteria is very drought resistant. Is it because of its root system, or because of less transpiration, or something happening above ground? But maybe it's the root system. If it's the root system, then maybe Cabernet Sauvignon on Grafton Mysteria can be more drought resistant than Cabernet Sauvignon on its own root. So it's definitely worth trying.
Cyprus has indeed very drought-tolerant varieties, and you can use them in France. So that we have climate change, and then where does Cyprus get their drought-tolerant varieties from? So you cannot get more hot and drier than Cyprus, I think. But so because I agree. I mean, it was very interesting. Also, I agree with everything you said. But my question is, irrigation can also delay ripening. Irrigation can also delay ripening. But so then shouldn't we use irrigation in an efficient way to try to delay the ripening?
Yes, definitely irrigation can be a way to delay ripeness, but not very much so. I think you can delay by a few days, but you cannot delay by 2 or 3 weeks with irrigation. And when you start to irrigate, very quickly, minimum irrigation is 50 millimeters. 50 millimeters is 50 liters per square meter, so if you produce 1 kilo per square meter, then it's 50 liters of water for 1 bottle of wine. That's a lot of water. So, but it depends on where your water resources come from. I'm not familiar with
the situation in Cyprus. In some, I think regarding irrigation, the situation is very different in different parts of the world. Like in many regions in Spain, Spain is a very dry country, and they are pumping water from aquifers, and I think this should be forbidden. It's a crime. In Languedoc area in France, they take water from the Rhone. In the Rhone, there's plenty of water. So when you look at irrigation in Languedoc, there's not so much issue with sustainability. But in Spain, there's a big issue with sustainability. So I don't know, maybe you can tell what the water resources are in Cyprus, if there's water available to irrigate. You better know than I do.
So we have climate change, so we get less water, right? So
But for irrigation, is it surface water or is it groundwater that's used?
So, I mean, our wine grows in the Caucasus Mountains, but Caucasus Mountains are not water scarce. But when we get climate change, we will also eventually run out of water. Right? So I agree with you that irrigation is also not a very good strategy. But I don't know if we can have more drought-tolerant varieties than we already have.
Sure.
If France are moving north, moving south, you're getting varieties from Cyprus, but where do we get our more?
But up to date, varieties like Sinisteri and Galubi and Maratestico, they do perfectly well. And I think they can even cope with slightly drier climate. So it's not so much to be totally against irrigation, but I think irrigation should be considered as the last option. So I think you have to take every possible adaptations to a dry climate, and then in some situations, okay, you can do. But in many countries, irrigation is taken as the easy way. Then you don't have to think. Put irrigation lines and water the vines, and you plant Merlot in Spain. It's
you said that it seems that reducing leaf area would actually be very frightening. But so far I have the impression that by actually encouraging vegetative growth, you would allocate the sugars to the growth instead of to the berries. So you would actually be very right.
I think it works in both directions. Either by severely reducing leaf area to food-weight ratio, but you need to be well under 1 square meter per kilogram of vines, and even maybe under 0.8 square meter of leaves per kilogram of vines, then you slow down the ripening. And when you have very vigorous vines with a lot of leaf area, then you also slow down the ripening. So I think in both extreme sides you can slow down the ripening. You have quicker ripening if you have a balanced canopy with say 1.5 square meter of leaf area per kilogram of grain, then you have quick ripening. So I think it works in both directions.
And if there's a bigger yield, that's also.
Yes, yeah, of course. The leaf area to food weight ratio, either to have a lower leaf area to food weight ratio, you can either reduce your leaf area or increase your yield.
What do you think about other crops or either the natural crops or artificial?
I think that the cover crop is a very interesting tool for managing vines, even in dry climates. In many dry climates, I think this is the case in Cyprus, the springs can be relatively wet because you come out in the winter and if your soil has a good water holding capacity. So in some situations you want to devigorate, and you can use cover crop and destroy it in May. And then you can invigorate your vines. If you need nitrogen, you can plant legumes and then destroy them in May. So I think even in dry climates, cover crop can be a very interesting tool. And of course, with cover crop, you reduce the use of herbicides. If you can destroy them again.
About the terroir effect, if I can. First, what's your opinion about the place and the role of the grower in the concept of terroir? Because sometimes we say that the grower is part of the tradition, or is it only, or to be more, let's say, invasive? was the final result of the terroir, or if then we are reducing the terroir impact.
So my opinion is that the grower is totally part of the terroir, and you cannot separate the terroir from the grower, because part of terroir is the resources from the environment: light, water, temperature, minerals, and water from the soil. But for every specific set of resources from the environment, you need to adapt the plant material. And that's a choice of the grower. It's a choice of the grower and the work from many generations before the grower, who selected Marateftico and Tinesbiri in Cyprus, and who created the rootstocks in France. And this is all, work from the growers. And for instance, if you plant Pinot Noir in Bordeaux, Bordeaux is not a good terroir. If you plant Cabernet Sauvignon in Burgundy, Burgundy is not a good terroir. So and that's a choice of the grower. It's the same with trading systems. In Bordeaux, we have a wet climate. We will never plant the bush vine, because the bush vines will, in our situation, the shoots grow 5 meters. And you cannot grow a bush vine in Bordeaux, but you grow bush vines in Cyprus. And that's also the choice of the grower. That's based on his experience and experience of all the growers who've been there before him. So for me, the role of the grower is very, very important in the terroir when he optimizes his choices. But of course, if he takes a variety which is not adapted to local climate, then he's not making a terroir wine. He's making a varietal wine. Nothing wrong with making a varietal wine, but this wine will not express terroir. If you grow Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc in Cyprus, then you can make a good wine, but you will not make a terroir wine. Your wine will not have the specific taste of a specific place. Because that's for me very much linked to ripening at the end of the season in cool conditions.
If I may add, the second question is also about the same thing, terroir expression. Is if we consider and we see how different the soils can be for some meters in the same area, the variation of the soil, maybe sometimes the climate. How we can consider the role of terroir in the expression of the local identity, the typicality, and if this is really related to some facts, or if this, in some cases, it's a tricky question.
It's a very tricky question.
So, if we can break it down with the main parts, what do you think about it?
So definitely, when it comes to terroir, there's a scale issue. You can consider terroir at the appellation level. You can consider terroir at the estate level. You can consider terroir at the plot level. Or even, as you say, there is variability in climate and soil inside the vineyard block, maybe even from vine to vine. Now, if you go from a regional appellation to an estate to a single vineyard, then you increase the terroir expression. But it's very difficult to break it down even at an intra-block approach. Then it comes more to precision viticulture. If you consider variation in soil and climate inside the vineyard block, and if you try to adapt the viticultural techniques to this, then it comes to precision viticulture. And I think it's an open question, there's no good answer. Maybe this variability in soil or climate inside the vineyard block adds to the complexity of the wine. Maybe not. I have not a good answer to this. But if you do precision viticulture, then you try to adapt to this variability with your viticulture techniques. But it's very expensive and not easily manageable.
It's an ongoing discussion.
I have a question. So you have talked about soil erosion and the preparation for the vineyards and the heterogeneity of nitrogen in the grapes. Here in Cyprus, it's inevitable to have terraces. Is there anything else that you could suggest to avoid this problem?
So if you create terraces, but you need to think if it's really always possible, because I think it's good to go to the Douro Valley in Portugal. And they have a lot of experience in steep vineyard, and they have 3 different approaches. Either the old terraces are very much like new terraces, small terraces, but very difficult for mechanization. And then there was a period where they created terraces with bulldozers, which they call patamares. And also they experienced downhill plantations. And in fact, they were pretty happy with downhill plantations, and they managed to do downhill plantations in quite steep slopes. One important asset of downhill plantations is that you have more regular climatic conditions in your vineyard block. You know that if you create small terraces, 2 or 3 row terraces, there's a lot of difference in ripeness between the 3 rows. And if you have downhill plantations, there's much more even climatic conditions, so more even ripening. Another point is that you simply put much more vines per hectare in downhill plantations. But downhill plantations without cover crop is very difficult for irrigation, so there's no ideal solution. If you're in a situation that you think that in your conditions you absolutely need to make terraces, I think that's very important to put the topsoil aside, you create your terraces, and then you try to put back the same amount of topsoil on every terrace, so that you have homogeneous. In the topsoil you have the organic material, and your nitrogen comes from your organic material. So that can be possibly an option. But there's no ideal situation where it's vineyard. But I think it's important to travel, to go to the Mosel, to go to the Douro, and to look what other people have done in other situations. Okay? There's no ideal recipe, but it's good to take ideas from other regions where they have experienced it.
Another question? I think that there are still many questions. Probably some of the people would like to talk to privately. So to sum up, I think that Cyprus is a very case study. So I think that this will be the very beginning of our cooperation. There is a lot of room for improvement and establishment of some cooperation. I take also the opportunity to thank specialists from Uras who came specifically for your site visit and your group today. And thank you very much for your presence here.
Gracias.